For the few of you who don't already know him, he's been one of the most productive members of the society for decades. And he has contributed a huge number of books and articles using descriptive psychology. He's got, I think, it says in there somewhere, around 80 publications that have been granted the honor of being published in juried, important journals, despite the fact that he is a descriptive psychologist. He has supported the
You might want to talk into the Here's this one, Sharon.
He has supported the society in multiple ways, by being on the board for a lot of years, by being president twice. I think it's only twice. Only twice. Once is enough. And by giving many wonderful talks at the conferences. Somehow on the side, besides doing all of this, he has been a professor of psychology, a father, and a soccer coach.
And a husband. And a husband.
You would say that, yeah.
Is that full time?
Depends on the wife, sometimes, yes.
The confusion between persons and their embodiment is probably eons old, but it's been very conspicuous in the media in the last several years. And this is the topic that he's going to address today. Very timely and very annoying to all of us, the confusion between persons and their embodiment.
Julie.
Let me use that mic. Cordless. Okay, good
You
morning.
gotta hold it up if you
So after the... Okay, so as you can see, I want to talk this morning about what is behavior and why is it not reducible to biological states of affairs. So this is this comes from a paper that is in press now. In APA Division 24 journal, the Journal of Theoretical and Philosophical Psychology, where I'm trying to do two things. Basically, it's part of a long-term project to get descriptive ideas out to broader audiences, including psychological mainstream audiences. It's also part of another project, long-term project. There's an old famous lecture called The Two Cultures by C.P. Snow, where he talked about in America there's sort of these two cultures that really don't interact very much and don't know very much about each other, which are the culture of science and the culture of the humanities. Okay. Well, I also think of this as being part of a culture war, not the same one that he was talking about exactly, but not unrelated. And that's a culture between those who seem to me to be everywhere, who are saying essentially we are biological robots. We are not persons. Deliberate action, choice is an illusion. There's no such thing. That's something 19th century philosophers believe, but we don't. And it's really, in essence, it's all really biological. That's the proper understanding of human behavior. And another group of people, represented, of course, by descriptive people, who are saying, no, we don't think so. We think there's such a thing as persons. And the hallmark of persons is the ability to engage in deliberate action, to entertain behavioral options and to genuinely select from among them. Okay. So this is part of that. I see he trying to have a voice in that cultural debate that's going on? So essentially the paper undertakes two things. One is to present Pete's analysis of behavior to a mainstream audience and talk about a little bit about so what can we do with this? Why should we care? And then secondly, to use his PA for behavior to argue against reductionism. To use it to say, this struck me, here's another use of it. You can use it to argue against reductionist positions. You can use it to show how the answer to the question, is it all really biological, is no, it's not. Okay. So first part of the paper is devoted to what is behavior. And just to say a little bit about the state of the field currently, the field essentially has come to no consensus on what the term behavior means. And for the most part, people really don't give up, really don't care. I looked at 26 psychological dictionaries and glossaries. 7 of them, just 7 of them, even had the term behavior in them at all. It was an entry in the dictionary, behavior. Okay, so this is, by most accounts, this is defined as the science of behavior. But almost 3/4 of dictionaries didn't even have the word in there. When it did appear, this is the kind of thing you saw. This comes from the Oxford Dictionary of Psychology. What is behavior? Behavior is the physical activity of an organism, including overt bodily movements and internal glandular and other physiological processes. So essentially, what am I now doing? I'm digesting.
It does happen.
So essentially, behavior is totally physical. The most common definition sounds like it comes from old radical behaviors. Behavior is the observable, overt activity of an organism. That's the most common thing you see. So what the paper does is say, well, here, why don't you all try this on for size? Maybe this will work better. After saying something about why should we care, it's like, okay, try this on for size. Okay? So I think you're all familiar with this, and I'll just riff through it, and I'll come back in a minute, if you're not totally familiar with it, to say something which will clarify what it means. So Pete said behavior has these parameters. On the left side, behavior, identity, the identity of the behavior, want, the motivational parameter, what the person is seeking to accomplish in that behavior. No, the cognitive parameter, the distinctions that are embedded in that behavior. KH, the know-how parameter, the skill or competency that's here now being exercised in the behavior. Performance, the process or procedural aspects of the behavior, including, importantly here, all bodily processes that are involved in the behavior. A, achievement, the outcome of the behavior. PC, the personal characteristics that are expressed in the behavior, the knowledge, the dispositions, whatever, that are expressed in the behavior. And finally, S, significance, what the person is doing by doing the concrete thing he or she is doing. Okay. So I'm not going to dwell there. But we'll come back in a different kind of way to this. So here we have a blank page, which I couldn't eliminate. All right, so paraphrase. So Pete is saying, whenever a state of affairs of the kind behavior is the case, whenever behavior occurs, a state of affairs of each of the kinds specified by the parameters is also the case. Okay, so it's like saying whenever a state of affairs of the kind of color is the case, then states, like whatever, this shirt is blue, then states of affairs of the kind hue, saturation, and brilliance are also necessarily the case. Okay, you can't say there's a color, but it has no hue, it's got no saturation, it's got no brilliance, yet it's a color. No, you can't do that.
Ray, quick question of understanding. I kind of missed, what is this paraphrased from?
I forget the origin of it offhand,
Okay,
but
that's fine.
it's, Pete said it.
This is paraphrasing Pete's stuff.
I'm pretty sure.
A famous Pete saying.
Is it familiar to you? That
I think that like the famous Spanish saying.
old Spanish?
Famous
Yeah, I don't think
old
it's just an old
Pete
Spanish.
I think he did say it. Sorry,
At some point he said it. Maybe 3 or 4 times.
All right, so I'm writing this article and I send the first version and they say, okay, we want a revise and resubmit. And one of our problems is, okay, you've got these parameters, but why should we accept them? Might they be arbitrary? Might some of them be unnecessary? Might this be some kind of tendentious thing, sort of, it sets up your second argument, but that's essentially what it's trying. Okay, so I had to justify this more. And so, logical exercise. Try to eliminate any of the parameters and see what you get. So let's take a behavior, and we'll take Sarah. Sarah's playing bridge, and Sarah at some point plays her queen of hearts. Okay, so that's her behavior. Then you go over to the parameters and you say, we should come back to them. You say, okay, well, is identity necessary? Well, okay, delete it. Well, that's tantamount to saying, no one. There is no behavior here. Nobody played the king of hearts, the queen of hearts. Okay, well, can't do that. Well, how about let's try deleting K? Well, that's tantamount to saying that in this behavior, no distinctions took place between whatever, hearts and spades, or between trumps and non-trumps, I'm sorry.
I have a partner who
I
plays
didn't
like
mean to use
that.
that.
So I have a partner who plays like that.
Sam Bridge, yeah.
Try deleting want. That's tantamount to saying that no new state of affairs was sought by Sarah. She wasn't trying to accomplish anything. She wasn't seeking anything. Okay, how about KH, skill? Well, delete that. That's tantamount to saying that no personality of hers came into play here. Huh? Can't do that. Delete P. That's tantamount to saying, well, no processes of a physical sort took place here. There were no brain events, there were no arm movement events, hand events. There was nothing like that occurred here. Obviously, you can't do that. Delete PC. That's tantamount to saying, well, no person characteristics of Sarah's were expressed in the behavior. No knowledge on her part, no dispositions of hers. Okay, can't do that. Finally, try deleting significance. Well, that's tantamount to saying that her behavior of physically laying down a card, laying a card upon a table, had no significance beyond the concrete moving of a physical object from one place to another. Okay, had no further significance. She wasn't doing anything by doing that. She wasn't engaging in any social practice like bridge or playing a trump card or whatever. She was just, okay, so you can't do that. So the logical justification here is that you can't delete any of these without incurring nonsense. So they're all necessary. You got to have them all. The guy, sorry, I had it right. All right, and that flew. That the person who registered that reservation said, "Oh, okay, I'm fine with that." Okay. So part 2 of the paper has to do with addressing the problem of reductionism, and the claim at the head of part 2 is behavior is not reducible to biological processes, implications of the parametric analysis of behavior. Okay, so here I'm going to read sections, key sections from the 3 parts of part 2. Okay, well, let me read something first. I have a choice now. I can either see you clearly and not see this. Or I can see this clearly and not you.
We don't.
Funny. I know that voice anywhere. Okay, so it starts out. In the parametric analysis of behavior presented above, biological facts appear in 2 places, the performance and the person characteristic, specifically embodiment parameter. Viewed from the perspective of interest here, the PA is saying in effect that while an aspect of every behavior is that it involves the occurrence of biological processes, there is much more to human behavior than these processes. Further, these other aspects, as demonstrated above, are no more dispensable to the phenomenon of behavior than hue, saturation, or billions are dispensable to the phenomenon of color. Thus, the second core claim and thesis of this paper, human behavior cannot be reduced to its biological aspects. When we describe Sarah's behavior of playing her queen, we cannot justifiably say the only actual things that just occurred were physical processes, brain events, muscular contractions, molar arm movements, etc. In response to this contention, a number of strong objections can be raised. The remainder of this paper is devoted to articulating and responding to what, in the author's estimation, are the most significant of these objections. So objection number 1 is that the non-physical behavior parameters have questionable ontological status. In other words, they're not really quite real. S.S. Stevens, in one of the most widely and favorably quoted statements in the history of psychology, once asserted that whatever exists in some quantity and can be measured. Stevens' dictum is consistent with the widely held position of physicalism. The central tenet of this position is that the physical exhausts the real, that the only actual phenomena are physical phenomena, that there are no immaterial realities, and that only physical objects, processes, events, and states of affairs are entitled to the ontological status of real or actual. Where behavior is concerned, what is real is an embodied biological organism. So this is the objector speaking here. Where behavior is concerned, what is real is an embodied biological organism moving in space-time and having ongoing brain, muscular, and other physical events taking place as parts of this activity. Alleged realities, such as motives, beliefs, discriminations, significances, values, and so forth, cannot be said to exist in the same way that, for example, physical objects such as brains, neurotransmitters, and synapses can be said to exist. They are, at best, properties of something else that is itself fully real, an embodied, behaving organism, and thereby can be said to have only a derivative existence by virtue of their inhering in this behaving organism. Okay, so that's the objection. So, reply. The assumptions embodied in this position might be the assumption embodied in this position might be termed one of ontological superiority. To express this assumption in its baldest terms, the notion is that some phenomena are more real than others. The particular version of this belief that is most pertinent here is that, as noted, only physical states of affairs may be considered to be, quote, really real. To allege otherwise can only be to posit the existence of spiritual substances, entities akin to ghosts and souls and angels, and this, of course, is a decisively deficient scientific move. What is wrong with holding that only physical states of affairs are real, and does this denial necessarily involve us in an unscientific dualism or spiritualism? If one backs off from any commitment as to which specific phenomena should be counted as real or actual, one can ask the more fundamental conceptual question. Well, what is it to say of any object, process, etc., that it is real? When we, the community of language users, and perhaps especially scientific language users, who have an obligation to use words consensually, use this locution, it would seem that its meaning is best captured by the simple notion that what is real is whatever in fact is the case. To say of some X that it is real is to say that it is in fact the case. To express the matter negatively, it is to assert that X is not fictional or imaginary or illusory or in any other possible sense not the case. To claim that only physical realities can be taken to be real from this vantage point is to expand the definition of real to the following one. Quote, what is real is whatever in fact is the case if and only if it meets the necessary assertability conditions to qualify as physical. That is, if it has properties such as mass, spatial extension, energy, charge, wave characteristics, and so forth. On this definition carried to its logical conclusion, all of the following statements are not about anything real. If you take that position, everything I'm going to say now are not about anything real. So, a series of statements here. A fundamental methodological principle, underscore that. A fundamental methodological principle of science is that one ought to subject one's theoretical contention to empirical test. Okay. 2. Lincoln's desire is want. Lincoln's desire to see more progress militarily led him to relieve General McClellan of his command. 3. Einstein's theory of relativity revolutionized physics. 4. Raising one's middle finger to another has a different significance in America than it has in the outback of Australia. And consequently, engaging in this behavior is likely to have different consequences. Okay, 5. A relation of deep mistrust between the Arabs and the Israelis is a major obstacle to peace. 6. The First Amendment to the Constitution prohibits the making of any law infringing upon the freedom of the press. Finally, number 7, mathematics is an indispensable tool in most sciences. So none of the phenomena I stress here, which are italicized in the text here, none of the phenomena italicized in these sentences has physical characteristics. Fundamental principles of science, desires, theories, significances, laws, relationships of mistrust, and mathematics cannot sensibly, that is, without incurring category error, be said to have mass, extension in space, energy, charge, or any other physical property. Do we really want, on this account, to deny them reality status? Could we seriously look at each of these sentences and declare the italicized words denote nothing real whatsoever? For example, there are no such things as mathematics, the theory of relativity, or mistrust between the Arabs and the Israelis. Further, denying them reality status, we want to take the next logical step and conclude that therefore each of them could in principle have had nothing whatsoever to do with the scientific practices, wars, Supreme Court rulings, inventions, and scientific revolutions mentioned in the sentences. Expressed differently, could we deny the validity of counterfactual conditional assertions such as, if they had not been aware of Einstein's theory of the convertibility of matter and energy, they would never have embarked upon the atomic bomb project. Skip a little. Though our metaphysical point of departure may be somewhat different than his, we echo here Wittgenstein's famous assertion that, quote, the world is everything that is the case. The world divides into facts, not things. So objection 2. Objector's claim here, if not itself obviously biological, behavior is nonetheless reducible to biological states of affairs. A further objection that might be raised against the present position is that psychological states of affairs, such as persons acting to bring about desired ends, making discriminations, and acting on personal values, while not obviously physical, are all in fact physical realities insofar as they are reducible to such. Nobel laureate Francis Crick expressed his position regarding psychological factors in general when he stated that, quote, your joys and your sorrows, your memories and your ambitions, your sense of personal identity and free will are in fact no more than the behavior of a vast assembly of nerve cells and their associated molecules. All they are. Values and so forth. In the same vein, noted microbiologist V.S. Ramachandran has contended that, quote, even though it's common knowledge these days, it never ceases to amaze me that all the richness of our mental life, all of our feelings, our emotions, our thoughts, our ambitions, our love life, our religious sentiments, and even what each of us regards as his own intimate private self is simply the activity of these little specks of jelly in your head, in your brain. It all reduces to what's going on with little specks of jelly in your brain. That's all that's really happening here. These and like-minded biological reductionists would assert that the seemingly non-physical parametric elements at issue in this article, such as wants, discriminations, and significances involved in behavior, are actually nothing over and above physical states of affairs. In the same way, for example, that the everyday phenomenon of water proves scientifically reducible to H2O, they would assert, and often do, so these parametric elements are reducible to the underlying biological states operative during the enactment of behavior. Reply. The example of water is a classic off-sided example of a successful reductive explanation in the history of science. In the case of water, scientific analysis at the chemical level revealed that water is reducible to H2O. That is, that water is nothing over and above a compound of hydrogen and oxygen. The macro observation level phenomenon is reducible to the micro level. If challenged to justify this assertion, the chemist will indicate that its justification lies in the fact that all of the properties of the reduced phenomenon, water, are explicable on the known physical properties of the reducing phenomenon H2O. The facts that water can be realized in different states such as liquid, solid, and gas, that it exhibits certain boiling and freezing points, that it is electrically conductive, and more, can all be derived on the basis of known facts about the chemical compound H2O. Statements expressed in the construct system of chemistry can fully explain all the properties of what, on a more molar phenomenal level, we have long designated water. Can the same be said for behavior? Returning to the example above of Sarah playing her Queen of Hearts, are we justified in claiming per Crick and Ramachandran that her behavior can be reduced to, that it is an underlying level, nothing over and above, the physical and especially brain parametric elements involved in it? If we grant, as argued above, that the other non-physical parametric states of affairs can neither be dispensed with nor regarded as unreal, already established that, then the burden of proof falls on the reductionist to demonstrate, as in the example of water, that all the observed aspects or properties of Sarah's or any other behavior can be explained on the basis of what we know about the biological states of affairs involved in it. That is, the reductionist must be able to explain, on the basis of the biological events operative in Sarah's behavior, such things as her discriminating kings from queens and the opportunity to win a trick, her wanting to achieve the enhanced strategic position, W, her exercising a skill or ability that she possesses, KH, and more. And the same will be true for any described behavior. Clearly and unarguably, at the present historical juncture, the reductionist cannot do so. From the known physical properties of H2O, we can explain the properties of water. From the known properties of the biological elements in Sarah's behavior, for example, properties of neurons, neurotransmitters, synaptic events, we cannot explain these facts about her behavior. We cannot get from the proposition A, that neural and other biological processes, X1 through X sub n, occurred in Sarah when she made her move. Here's everything that's biologically going on in Sarah. to the proposition that, quote, Sarah wanted to win the trick, and perceiving, seeing, K, the opportunity to do so by playing her Queen of Hearts, she did so, P, her performance. Okay. The reductive physicalist claim represents a massive IOU, a massive promise to deliver in future, and not cash on the barrelhead. At present, and perhaps in principle and thus for perpetuity, there is no conceivable biologically reductive explanation of the discriminations, wants, skill implementations, values acted upon, or other non-physical parametric states of affairs involved in behavior. There is no alternative description or explanation in terms, for example, of synaptic events, neurotransmitters, or neural networks for phenomena such as an occurrent behavior involving wanting, or discriminating, or achieving significance. There remains, by virtually universal consensus, an uncrossed explanatory gap, famous locution in philosophy, and thus no strong evidentially based reason to conclude that behavior is reducible to its biological aspects. So third and final objection. We already have successful biological explanations. Okay, we see them on TV all the time. Nightly news. Nightly news once, I saw the headline was, the brain processes that make you shop. It was on the news.
Brought to you by Bristol Myers.
This recently I saw the prejudiced brain. So those are kind of cheap shots, but it may be rejected.
Those aren't cheap shots. Those are seminars given by people who need to sell their products so people get their CEUs. I mean, I got an advertisement for calming the overactive ADHD brain just last week. I mean,
Yeah. Well, it's everywhere.
yeah.
Okay. Objection number 3. We already have successful biological explanations. Okay. It may be objected that the arguments above ignore a simple fact. We already have many successful and quite helpful biological explanations of behavioral phenomena. For example, the neuropathology characteristic of Alzheimer's disease has been shown to result in persons being impaired in their ability to remember. Of course. Damage to prefrontal cortex areas of the brain frequently results in a pattern of behavioral perseveration, in which afflicted individuals repeat the same behavior over and over, despite knowing that it is not effective. Genetic factors are implicated in the etiology of numerous mental disorders, such as autism, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, schizophrenia, depression, and bipolar disorder. So further examples, but I won't list them all. Many further examples could be cited, and many more such findings will undoubtedly come about with continued research. In light of such massive evidence, how can it be claimed that we lack successful biological explanations for behavioral phenomena? Reply. That we have many successful and fruitful biological explanations of behavioral phenomena is an indubitable fact. However, the nature of these explanations is such that it does not contradict the present claim that behavior is not reducible to its biological elements. As noted above, the traditional requirement for successful reductive explanations in science is that the known properties of the reduced phenomena, such as water, must be explicable on the known characteristics of the reducing phenomena, such as H2O. But this is not what we see in any of the successful biological explanations, two prominent types of which will be examined examine briefly. Okay, so the first kind here is deficit-based explanations. We see a lot of deficit-based explanations. A great many successful biological explanations found in the literature have the following general form. If a given behavior or kind of behavior X requires that biological states Y be the case, but Y is not the case for a given individual, then that individual will be restricted in his or her ability to engage in behavior X. Trivially, for example, if the behavior requires vision and Jack is blind, Jack will be so restricted. Okay. Explanations in terms of certain neurotransmitter levels, hormonal levels, brain structures, and other biological states being necessary for certain behavioral phenomena to occur. For example, sufficient serotonin levels for a positive mood state, but these biological states not being the case for persons comprise a very large set of our successful biological explanations. Two things may be noted about such explanations. First, they are special cases of a more general form of explanation. This form is not confined to biological states of affairs, but applies to all the parameters of behavior. For example, if a given behavior or kind of behavior requires certain knowledge, or requires certain skills, or requires certain motivations, but Jill lacks any of these to a significant degree, Jill will be restricted in her ability to engage in that behavior. In other words, this deficit form of explanation refers to all the parameters, not just the biologically relevant ones. Second, there is nothing reductive about such explanations. That Jill can't do X because she lacks the requisite knowledge does not logically imply that behavior X is, quote, nothing but cognitive. That she can't do it because she lacks the motivation does not imply that it is, quote, nothing but motivational. And that she can't do it because she lacks the necessary physical states does not imply that the behavior is nothing but biological. Second kind of explanation, successful biological explanations. A second general form of neuroscientific research focuses on specific brain regions that are activated in connection with various behaviors and behavior disorders. The primary tool employed in this research in recent years has been functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI, a procedure that measures cerebral blood flow associated with neuronal activation in specific regions of the brain. By this method, such activation areas have been discovered that are associated with a range of anxiety disorders such as post-traumatic stress disorder, social anxiety disorder, and specific phobias, obsessive-compulsive disorder, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and more. Further associations have been found in connection with non-pathological human activities, such as meditation, decision-making, and thinking about specific objects. If one ponders such findings in connection with what has been said thus far in this article, the interpretation that emerges is clear. What these neuroimaging techniques are capturing in some way are physical states of affairs that fall under the performance and the PC embodying parameters of behavior. The relation of these states to the complex state of affairs, that is the behavior, is that they are sum among the totality of states of affairs, along with K, KH, WA, non-physical PC, and S factors, significance, that comprise the totality. Interpretation, per our discussion above, would not be that these biological events are all that is really happening here, or that this is the efficient cause of what is transpiring at the observational level in the behavior, or that this is a merely correlational association denoting no more than an observed empirical co-occurrence between biological and psychological states. Such findings can and have been of enormous value. For example, in the case of some behavioral impairments, such as an inability to read, they may serve to identify the precise brain areas that are characteristically operative in reading, and thus where one might search for a physiological deficit with respect to something necessary for reading behavior to occur. Cool. Again, however, there is no basis here for a reductive conclusion that reading or any behavior is nothing over and above biological. The physical facts merely identify a subset of the state of affairs necessarily involved in reading, along with K factors. Johnny distinguishes letters and words. W factors, Johnny is seeking information about yesterday's baseball scores. I'm learning that the Cubs were wiped out. KH factors, Johnny is implementing his ability to read. And PC factors, Johnny is acting upon his passionate interest in baseball. The physical facts do not support the reductive conclusion that his behavior is nothing over and above the biological processes transpiring in him as he reads. Conclusion. Concluding statement here. There exists a phenomenon, behavior, that involves biological aspects, but that inescapably involves other aspects. In this paper, based on a formulation of behavior developed within descriptive psychology, I have articulated these other aspects, and in doing so, presented a conceptual formulation of this core concept. Further, based on the foregoing, I have argued, 1, that although not fulfilling the necessary conditions to be regarded as physical, these other aspects or parameters of behavior designate actual, real states of affairs. 2, that none of them can be dispensed with as being involved in behavior. And 3, that they cannot be reduced to biological states of affairs. That being the case, claims from some that biological descriptions and explanations will one day replace psychological ones, and that the science of psychology will be superseded by that of biology, are essentially promissory notes that cannot be supported on the basis of either current evidence or logic. Further, it may be the case, if one considers the implications of the arguments raised above, as well as those of others cited in this article, that these reductionist claims will prove to be unsupportable in principle and thus in perpetuity. Time will tell. That's it.
We have 10 minutes for questions. He promised me 10 minutes and you've got it.
Not longer than I thought. I think, good.
Two things. First, the first part of your presentation has finally given me, I think, an ideal tool for how to teach the parameters, and which is by doing the deletions as you described. It's just a beautiful way of doing it. Little anecdote. It seemed if you, to the extent that you resolve question 1, questions 2 and 3 logically end up with very little force. I had an interesting engagement with someone arguing the Hobbesian position that only thing that is real is material. And I said, well, what about the relationship between you and me as we're having this discussion? And he said, okay, now what you're confusing here, and I thought this was a nice sleight of hand, which he took via the route of the logical positivists, is he says you're confusing, or what we might want to say is that what's real, what we call is categorically real, is this material stuff. This other stuff we'll classify in terms of whether it's true or not. So he's going to make a discrimination between what's real and what's true. So mathematics is true, this relationship is true, that Mary is John's wife is true, that Mary is an object and John's is an object is real. And so they went on that way. And it's a kind of sleight of hand that it's useful to be prepared to roll with.
It is. If you wanted to say something like that there's a relationship, a mistrust here, like I said, between Arabs and Israelis, refers to something that isn't real. It isn't actual. There's no such actual state of affairs. You can say, "Oh, but it's true." You go, well, "What?" Like it's like what?
But it's
What
like
are you saying?
there's a language restriction, it's a technical restriction that, that allows
Yeah.
some people to say, okay, the ontological material is the stuff we're going to call real, and the other stuff we're going to categorize in terms
Yeah.
of truth tables.
Yeah, truth tables. Yeah, yeah. Well, I agree. It's sort of a sleight of hand, but it's sort of a trying to disguise something because you don't want to say, "Hey, people talk about a relation of mistrust between the Arabs and Israelis," or people talk about, relativity theory, but there's no such thing. Oh yeah, well, yeah, true, but it's true. What the,
It's not real, but
there's no such thing. Well, as soon as you say, and remember here, the criteria for real, it has to have, it's like you can't just, I can say anything. I can say, Joe's suspicion weighs 3 grams and is 6 feet tall. I can say anything. But when you say something's physical, you have to, and somebody says, well, yeah, I'm from Missouri, show me. You got to say, well, it has mass, extension, space, charge, wave character. It's got to have physical properties. You can go around saying anything, but if you're going to put up or shut up, you got to say, well, it meets the criteria for saying it's a material something. You can't just say, I attest that it's,
Politicians never learned that.
So is that,
Let's
is,
not go there.
is that partly,
Harold?
is that partly the case with the term behavior? That when we talk about behavior, that we are already talking about something that doesn't simply fit into that physical category?
Well, so here, it's like Pete was saying, we're talking about a phenomenon, and they say, yes, there is. The real world is the world you see when you look around you, and one of the things in that world is behavior, people behaving. So it's, in descriptive, there's such thing as behavior. So I guess I'm missing something here.
So if there is a biological component to behavior,
Yeah.
say, the physical
Yeah.
act of placing the
Right, that's-
card
yeah.
on the table,
Yeah.
that is a different thing to describe than what we mean when we casually talk about behavior. And it seems as though that definition is used in 2 different ways by 2 different people talking about 2 different things. So is it possible to describe the hand putting the card down as behavior
Yeah.
in
You
a
can have a description
in a
of this
completely
card on the
reduced
table.
way?
And then somebody said, okay, that's a behavior description. It's what's called a performative description. There's no commitment to what he's doing or his motivations or anything. It's just, this is what happened.
Mm-hmm.
But then in descriptive, we say, well, yeah, you might give that on some occasion,
Mm-hmm.
but, but then in the vast majority of cases, you'd be saying, she was playing her queen of hearts. She was trying to capture the trick. She was,
Which is different than if we were describing a billiard ball being hit by another billiard
Yeah,
ball,
absolutely.
which we would not describe as behavior.
Yeah, the physical facts wouldn't exhaust
Right,
the intelligibility of the event.
Right, right.
So, I don't know who. Lang, go.
Well, I had the same reaction that there's a preceding distinction, like the examples that you gave from Lincoln and the Palestinian Israelis, et cetera.
I'm sorry, like what? My hearing is not so
There's
good.
a preceding distinction that he was alluding to between, whether it's real or true, but how to explain events like that. Even, I would say you can concede, let's say in 500 years, all these things can be reduced, can be explained on a biological level. That doesn't get you anything in terms of the example that you gave. What does that give you in regard to those? If you had a biological, neurological explanation. There's a preceding distinction, which is, what are we trying to understand through the term behavior?
Broad, what are you trying to say in general about behavior?
Well,
So I thought we have certain kinds of biological explanations. There are certain sort and they're not reductive. But what, so I'm not sure what in general we're trying to explain.
well, let's just take your examples from history and current affairs.
Yeah, general.
What, would you describe those as behavior, or what category do those belong in?
Well, I'm not sure, the category of behavior, but you might, when you say, when you give a description like, Lincoln terminated his command because he wasn't doing anything, and he wanted to see some action, he wanted to get something done here. I mean, you could say, okay, well, that focuses on the motivational parameter. Here's why Lincoln was doing it, here's what he was doing, he was trying to...
It's a state of affairs.
It's a state of affairs.
It's a state of affairs.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a state of affairs, yeah. So
You're
focusing on
basically state of-
motivational parameters given, so you can say, well, you can call it, so it's pretty much a motivational description or explanation.
Well, state of affairs seems to be a higher level analysis that biology doesn't reach.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Tony.
To use current academic parlance, I think part of what you're talking about here is the privileging of the physical.
Yeah, yes.
And
It's like,
for those who have
Right.
not read it or might have forgotten about it, one of Pete's last papers called What There Is, How Things Are deals with that magisterially and in as much depth and detail as you would ever want to have, but it is not in any way boring. So the kinds of things that T was saying, et cetera, you will find that and a good deal more if you're really interested in digging any deeper into that particular issue. Not that I think you need to, because you've done a nice job.
yeah, so that's a good notion, that certain things have, certain things have ontological privilege. They are really real, whereas other things like attitudes or values, well, they're sort of airy-fairy. They're at best, at best, things that have their existence by virtue of inhering in a biological organism. That's and Pete talks about that.
Yeah, and
I think we have time for one more.
I wanted to ask Wynn, what would that fellow say if you just make the distinction that the relationship between you and him, right, there is something that he is prepared to act on? The distinction
Well, you
that
acknowledge that that's true.
true is what is the case.
Well, the notion of privilege, I think, here is sort of significant in that people say, look, in our profession, we're making our living on these physical objects, and we're going to give them the kind of, Samuel Johnson reality that, a stone is real because you can kick it and it hurts your foot. This other stuff has a different logical, it involves different logical types. The kinds of logical types we're not going to call real, but we may assign them as true. Similarly, with the state of affairs system, we have all these different ways of moving from one set of descriptions to all other set of descriptions. And what happens is within the network of just describing ontological rock reality, you don't have a grammar or language that allows you to go from persons to behavior to language to world. And so it's just an inadequate, it locks him into a corner.
So, what do you think he would say to that?
He'd say, oh.
Okay, I'm going to have to tell you that our time is up, so carry on your conversations in the break. We'd like to have you back here at 10 minutes past 10, which is also 10 minutes from now.